Right. I believe it is 6:30, so I will go ahead and get us started this evening. Tonight is our April 22nd, 2024 board meeting, and Mr. Cusick, if you will please perform roll call.
Mrs. Best.
Present.
Mrs. Davis.
Present.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Present.
Ms. Harless.
Present.
Mrs. Hudson.
Present. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nikki Hudson. I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as president of our Board of Education this year. To my far left is Kelly Davis, who is our board vice president, board member Amber Epling Skinner, our treasurer TJ Cusick. To my right, Superintendent Dr. Bowers, board member Stephanie Harless, and board member Jennifer Best. If you'll please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could get a motion to approve our agenda with one modification, and that is we do not need to meet for executive session tonight. So if I could get a motion to approve the agenda as published with the removal of the executive session.
So moved. Second.
Would you please call for the vote?
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes, motion carries. And that brings us to our Board of Education recognition. If I could receive a motion to recognize Molly Fiesler and Matthew Welsh for being named Certified Master Athletic Administrators by the National Interscholastic Athletic Directors Association.
So moved. Second.
Assume no discussion other than everyone's in full favor. So would you please call for the vote?
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes.
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Excellent. Motion carries. It is my pleasure. I'm going to switch microphones. Try not to. There, we get this huge. Is this working okay? Excellent. Molly and Matthew, would you mind joining us up here, please? And Principal Scully, would you mind joining us as well? We can go ahead and start with Molly and Matthew. You see your athletes sometimes stand up here while we speak, and now I'm going to ask you to do the same while I brag about you for just a few minutes. And forgive me, I am going to look at my notes because just saying National Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association is a mouthful. But they are the ones who set different levels of certification for its members, and they have done that since 1995. There are 3 different levels of certifications to be an athletic director. There's the Registered Athletic Administrator, a Certified Athletic Administrator, which requires your RAA certificate, and then many professional development classes in addition to that, and passing a national exam. And then you come to the master level, and we have 2 masters in front of us tonight. So in order to be a master athletic administrator, it requires, as you would imagine, both the RAA and the CAA certification. And then in addition to that, additional professional development classes and either a project or an oral presentation. And if I am correct, both of you did a project, which I hope you'll share a little bit with us about tonight, that are scrutinized by a committee and then approved. And each of these projects, which this I think is fantastic, very forward thinking, becomes a part of an archive of projects for AD professionals to access. So when you have a particular issue that you're faced with, you can go back and say, what is the research that's been done in this area? What are best practices, things along those lines. Since 2001, there have been only 19 certified master athletic administrators certificates given to athletic administrators in Ohio. So 19 in Ohio. And only 3 of these athletic administrators are currently employed as ADs within Central Ohio school districts. Worthington is very proud to be home of these 2 very impressive, hard-working ADs, and we're grateful that you choose to serve in our district. Give them another round of applause. Would you mind sharing a bit about the project that you did?
So I'll get a little pat on the back from our technology director maybe for this, but the project I did was to put all of our information for our head coaches in a Google Drive in a folder and kind of organize it and then do the same for our conference. We were always saying, hey, do you have the schedule? People were still asking me for the schedule from the Pickerington Division days, which was the Ohio. And I'm here now, so I don't have that anymore. So we couldn't find anything. It was here, there, and everywhere. Who are our officials? Who's our assigner? So we put that all in one spot. And now people have to learn better how to use it. But it's all in one spot so that at the point when I walk away, it will still live on and everything will be in one spot.
I just learned what Molly's project was. I actually never knew what that was. Mine was actually kind of similar. So I'm responsible for all of our schedules. So we've got 33 varsity and club sports. As you can imagine, head coaches deliver those schedules a number of different ways. Plus we have our conference schedules. So I had created it's a Google sheet document with 30 some tabs on it that has all of our schedules in it. That coaches can use kind of as a sandbox to plan their schedules for years out, where I can share our conference schedules. But then additionally, coaches can look at other tabs to see what might be going on certain dates. This grew to include dates that we want to avoid, religious holidays and stuff like that. And then also there's some new columns being added to help coaches plan their transportation needs. So shifting from text messages, phone calls, emails, sheets of paper to one document that we could, napkins, I got them on napkins. It comes into one area now. So it's turned out to do well for us.
Mr. Scully, Principal Scully, would you like to say a few words? I'm good. I'm just going to stand here. On behalf of the entire Board of Education, truly thank you for the amount of effort and energy that you choose to put into our school district and obviously choose to put into making it a place that's not only great for our students right now, but will be a great place for students for years to come. Thank you very much. Thank you. Truly, thank you. I just want to thanks, Julie. Do we get a quick picture? Do we get a quick picture?
Can you get it? Yeah.
So we can promote beyond the Board of Education meeting, the great work you guys do. One, two, three. Thank you. All right, that brings us to the portion of our meeting where we have visitor comments. Bear with me for a moment while I read what's in our agenda, which has been published. It's just a good reminder to everyone who's participating in this portion of our meeting. The school board and administrative staff encourage and appreciate community interest in meetings of the Board of Education. This section of the agenda is designed to hear views of community members about their schools and items on the agenda. Each speaker will be asked to address the board at the visitor's podium so that the speaker's remarks may be heard clearly. The speaker should give their name and street address and limit comments to a maximum of 5 minutes. Consistent with our policy 9130 on public complaints, we ask that complaints about particular employees be referred to the superintendent and not addressed during public session. We remind all speakers that our district values and respects all people as they are, and that our district is committed to creating and maintaining safe spaces for all of our students and community members. We want to remind our community that we value public input and always appreciate when our community members remember our district values, refraining from using harmful or offensive language, and for sharing your comments in a civil and respectful manner. Please note that it is not our usual practice to respond to remarks during the visitor comment section of our meeting. And with that, if Jennifer Us to the section of our agenda where we are focused on improving the workload of special education staff and outcomes for students with disabilities in a cost-effective manner.
I'm going to do it. Really excited. Almost a year ago now, we worked with our WEA, our Worthington Education Association, which is our teachers union, in the collective bargaining process. And we agreed jointly that we wanted to do a special education audit. And then together with the WEA, we selected a group called New Solutions K-12 that would come and do that audit. And that's been a 10-month process. So joining us here this evening is Nate Levinson. Nate is the president of New Solutions K-12. He's worked with 250 different districts in over 30 states. He's published 30 articles and 6 different books, several of them on special education. And he and his team, again, have been on site, on Zoom, doing interviews over the last 10 months. And so today, Nate's here to present his findings.
Thank you. Can folks hear me? Perfect. Super excited to be with you. A little bit of PTSD. I spent 6 years on the school board, but it's always easy on the other side of the table. But very excited to be with you tonight. Wanted to share just briefly the process of what we went through. More importantly, the findings. We'll do that in about 20 minutes and leave plenty of time for your questions. I think the 2 things before I get into the specifics that I think are most important to know. One, that going in, our goals were to do 3 things. 1, to find ways to improve outcomes for kids. 2, to improve the work life for your staff. And 3, to do those first 2 things within the budgets you have. That's what we did going in. Happy to say I believe we got to that place. And the other thing that I want to say is we came out of the process. It was really exciting to see the level of energy, excitement, commitment from the leadership down to the teachers that we worked with, the association. You'll see as we walk through what we learned and what we're suggesting, it does represent a new way of thinking, a new way of serving kids. But what was really exciting to see is just how many of your leaders and how many of your teachers really wanted something better for their kids and better for the staff, and how they have really gravitated around what we've shared with them. So it is a very pleasurable experience to be able to come and tell you what we've learned and how people are thinking about it, and certainly to get your thoughts and questions as we do that. I think the 3 things that are worth knowing about me that Superintendent nice enough to already share. The first is everything I'm going to share with you today, I have done and led as a school district leader. There is no place for theory. This is real work that's been done in real places. I was fortunate to lead a team that when we implemented this, we closed the general ed special ed achievement gap by 40 points. We reduced the number of kids who struggled to read by 2/3. Then the think tanks came to study us, and that seemed like a very good time to become a consultant. From that, I've worked now with almost 300 school districts, so we've seen kids are similar, districts are not. So plans need to be modified and adjusted for your culture and your history, and we recognize that. And lastly, that we're the kind of firm that we are practical. I think it's the nicest thing people say about us. And even though these are fairly significant ways of thinking differently, we know they can be done. So the goals of the work, let's understand what you're doing. Let's celebrate what's going well. Good news never gets enough attention. And let's also think about where you might want to go next in a kind of mindset of continuous improvement. We don't come in and say good or bad, just here's where you are, here's where you might want to go next. The research plan, very comprehensive. We interviewed 100+ people, including some of you all, focus groups with teachers, administrators, parents, staff, families, students. We observed, visited your schools, watched teaching and learning in action. We looked at a mountain of data, including asking many of the special educators to share what they did for a week in very fine increments so we could see how their time was used. And from looking very, very broadly, we came up with a short list, 2 short lists actually, one of things going well and one of things you might do to go even better. And because again, we are practical, a long list is not helpful. Nobody has the bandwidth or the capacity to implement a dozen things. Essentially, we had 5 recommendations with the note that 5 was too many, and we worked with a group of teachers and leaders, what we call the Guiding Coalition, to help narrow that list down even further. So what did we learn? Things going well, 5 things really rose to the top. They're not the only 5, but they are 5 that really stood out. First, the leadership and the efforts to create a multi-tiered system of supports, particularly around elementary literacy, was really, really, really well conceived and very well implemented. Staff at almost every level could not wait to tell us about what it is, how it is working, how it is helping. It was just a pleasure to see it embedded and embraced so many of the best practices. And to be really honest, about 9 out of 10 districts that have embarked on MTSS, the staff hate it. They love the concept. There are very few places where staff say, this is good, this is working, this was well managed. You are one of those. And so that is a really very strong commendation and a foundation to build off of in some of our recommendations going forward. Also, something we don't see very often is the district invested extensively in training and developing special educators, particularly around their ability to teach reading, a very powerful investment, one that, again, so many districts somehow seem to forget that special educators are an important part of teaching kids who struggle to read. You didn't forget that. It was high-quality training, and the folks who received it said it really made a difference. Really want to commend our third commendation that school and district leaders valued phasing out of special education services prior to graduation. This idea of valuing independence, of recognizing that one of the purposes of school is to get kids through school, but more importantly, it is prepare them for life after school. In a lot of districts we work in, if you talk to kids or parents or when they hit 2025, they will say, hey, you got me through school, but post-graduation, less prepared. We really saw a commitment to not be those folks and to help kids be successful both in school but also after graduation. Obviously goes, maybe should have been the first commendation, your teachers, your staff, your leaders, incredibly hardworking. They care deeply about their kids. They're actually very proud to be part of the Worthington school system. You've got a talented, committed group of folks. And with that, I know you can do anything that you set your mind to because they are good and they want to be better. And also wanted to commend the district learning centers trying to help kids stay in their home schools. These are the units for kids with more significant disabilities. I know it's not always completely possible, but really a commitment to minimize the amount of transition, to keep them in their home schools, to have thoughtful feeder patterns as they move through the schools. 5 things to be very proud of. Often, quite honestly, many of these in a fair number of our districts, they're on the other list. Things that folks didn't quite do yet, but should. So you are starting from a very high level of strength and many things going well. But not perfectly, and no system is functioning perfectly. This is really about where do you go next. I will not read you this long list. It is there for reference. We will dissect each of them in a bit of detail. First and foremost, if your goal, and I know it is, and I know it's the goal of your teachers and your leaders, is to raise achievement for all students, including those with disabilities. Tonight's discussion, most of the discussion focusing on kids with mild to moderate disabilities. What we know from the research is that if your goal is to dramatically close the achievement gap for kids with special needs, general education is critically important. Special education comes second. Special ed on its own is not the solution to high levels of achievement. General education teachers have to play a major role in supporting kids with mild to moderate disabilities. It's really embracing this idea that students with disabilities are general education students first and foremost. What we saw, however, generated and driven by caring is something quite different. What we saw, I think one of your special educators said it really, really well. It feels like they, general educators, are relying on us to deliver some sort of magic to students that have IEPs, and only we have that magic. It came through in a lot of conversations with teachers who came out and told us that, teachers who hinted at it. As we saw and observed in classrooms, general education teachers have, and it's not every teacher, but on the whole, a sense that if a student has a disability, there's a special educator who can help them learn. And again, driven by caring. A story I tell a lot is I've had a doctor, general practitioner for 20 years. I know he cares about me. He knows an awful lot about me and my kids. And one day he's listening to my heart and didn't like what he heard. Because he cared, he said, you should go to the Brigham and Women in downtown Boston to a specialist. He didn't send me away because he didn't give a damn about me. He sent me away because he thought there was somebody who had these very specialized skills that was exactly what I needed. So I went. Happy to say my heart is fine. But you have a lot of teachers who are thinking, hey, these kids, they need something special. We've got people with special in their name called special educators. They'll help. And what we're sharing with you tonight is in every district that has ever dramatically closed the achievement gap, those general educators are saying, I've got to be the first line of instruction. I am, in fact, the most important teacher in this student's life, and the special educators will also help. I know as a district you have embraced inclusion, which is a best practice, and that is great. Kids with mild to moderate disabilities, or all kids with disabilities, should be in the general education classroom. And I think there is, I want to say, a bit of misunderstanding, because as kids have moved into the gen ed classroom, as you've increased inclusion, and people are saying, see, we're doing the right thing, but you've had to bring a second teacher into that classroom with them. That a surprisingly large number of the staff we met, just gen ed staff we met, really believed it would be very odd to have kids with disabilities in their classroom without a special educator. In the districts that have closed the achievement gap, most classrooms, 99% of them have kids with disabilities, and they have one teacher in there at a time. And so it's a fairly deeply embedded sense that it would take a special educator to serve kids. And even though I think you have more classrooms with multiple teachers in them, one of the most common refrains we heard was, we're going to need more special educators because the number of kids with disabilities are growing and you can't really expect a gen ed teacher to do this on their own. What is fascinating, and I want to appreciate the gen ed teachers, is that good teaching is good teaching. That if you look at the strategies that will dramatically improve outcomes for kids with disabilities, it is the exact same list of teaching strategies, the exact same practices for kids without disabilities. I've shared on this screen, and I know we shared it with many of the staff here. And when we showed them the list, we said, hey, is this a list for gen ed or is this a list for special ed? It's like, whoa, it is the same list. So we're not going to be asking or expecting general education teachers to double the amount of things they know and do 2 of everything. But we also know that many of your teachers do not feel they have the confidence or capacity to teach kids with mild to moderate disabilities. That's why they're asking for the special educators to be there. So one of our core recommendations was, first, we do need to make gen ed a bigger part of the lives of kids with mild to moderate disabilities. But to do that, you're going to need to support your teachers, many of whom don't quite feel comfortable or confident yet. And a big part of that support is going to come through job-embedded instructional coaching, because that is the strategy that's been most effective in building that confidence and that expertise in teachers. That's kind of idea number 1. Help close the achievement gap by gen ed playing a bigger role, and help gen ed teachers have the skills and confidence to do just that. And that will not happen overnight, but it can definitely happen. Now, if you do that, you're about halfway home. High quality core instruction is the most important and the first step for kids with disabilities. On top of that, kids who struggle, and that's kids who are struggling with or without a disability, are going to need extra time to learn on top of the core instruction. And that extra time's got to be taught by teachers who know the content that we're asking them to teach. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, here's my picture. This is the formula that helps you close the achievement gap by 40 points. It is high quality core instruction, and on top of that, extra time to learn taught by a teacher who knows the content. You do both those things and remarkably good things happen. Unfortunately, and again, getting back to the who does that in teaching, if I struggle to read, I need somebody deeply trained in teaching reading. If I struggle in math, I need somebody who knows math inside and out, 3 ways to teach it to me. As we looked at this best practice and compared it to your current practices, what is fascinating is that if I'm a student who struggles, who does not have a disability, you do a fair amount of this. So, like, congratulations. But if I am a student with a disability, you do not do much of this. Again, driven by a desire to help, but it is really very different what happens for students with a disability versus without. What we're seeing for kids with disabilities at the elementary level, the primary support is what's called pull-out support. So if I have a disability, I struggle to read, during the reading period, a special educator will pull me out and work with me. And it's great that you've been training your special educators to be skilled in the science of reading and to be trained in as a teacher of reading, but they're doing it during the reading period. So as a student who struggles, I get less core instruction, less, than the student who didn't struggle. There's no extra time there. At the middle and high school level, overwhelmingly, we saw 2 strategies. One is co-teaching, where a special educator and a general educator go into the classroom at the same time. So you did double up on the number of teachers, but the number of minutes I got to learn math or science or social studies didn't change at all. And then for some, not a lot, but some, and way too many, I might add, some kids with disabilities, still mild to moderate disabilities, have what we refer to as replacement classes. This is instead of being in a math class with a general educator and a special educator, I've got a separate math class just with the special educator. That class is not likely to cover all the material. It is not as rigorous. So if I'm in a replacement class, I'm not even getting core instruction. Again, that's a small number of kids. But if I am getting core instruction in the middle and high school, it is very unlikely that I'm getting any extra time. So there are a lot of strategies that have been used And all these practices that you're doing are very common. I want to be very clear about this. This is a very common set of special education practices, but we should take no comfort in the fact that they're common, because nationwide, kids with disabilities achieve at pretty low levels. They're the only group that has seen a larger and increasing achievement gap over the last 15 years. And it is why more and more districts are saying, and why I was really excited to see how your own district responded to the, hey, if we want different outcomes, we're going to have to do something differently. And people seemed very, very comfortable that this is the differently. The thing that we want to be uncomfortable with, quite honestly, is that many of the most effective supports are not available to students with disabilities. You have, for example, at the secondary level, intensive classes in which a student will go to math and then get extra help in math. That's the extra time. The extra help in math is delivered by a math teacher. You've got kids, the elementary level, who get help, are in the class for core reading. They fall behind. They get extra help from a certified reading teacher later in the day. So those are two perfect examples of the best practice in work. We literally had teachers say, and it's weird, Nate, like I had this student and they were making headway, but then they got an IEP. So of course, they were removed from the class, because it wouldn't be fair to give them both the extra help and the special ed help. But then the teacher said, but I would have thought my help would be better. And so what we're seeing is a system in which getting an IEP doesn't always lead you to and often away from some of the best supports and services available. So that's kind of, those two are the big academic recommendations. Moving past that, we saw a third recommendation. And this one's fairly technical. Your process for identifying kids for special needs, writing IEPs, managing the IEP process is very good. It runs smoothly, it's thoughtful, it's getting the right kind of inputs and outputs. So we wanted to commend that. But we did notice that in some of the less common situations, the 3% or 5% of the cases, your standard systems and procedures didn't work as well. And so we had identified for preschool age students, English learners, students new to the district, meaning they're moving in from someplace else, and also kids moving from one level, say middle school to high school. In some of these specialized cases, we thought your standard system and practice didn't work as well. I want to talk just a little bit about kids moving out of preschool and into kindergarten, being one that stood out as an example. And this really gets to, it's an early age to know. There are some kids who absolutely know they have a disability, open and shut. You will have other kids who are learning at a slower rate or adjusting to school. And to be really clear, the definition of who has a disability and who does not, it is not a science. We may pretend it to be, but it is not a science. There's definitely value judgment. And what we saw is a sense that, quote, it can't hurt. Like out of love and caring and kindness, it would be a really good thing if it's on the fence. We should write an IEP and nothing but good can come from it. The research just says otherwise. For a student who does not have a disability, getting an IEP often does take you further away from services. It changes the way parents, yourself, others think about you. And having a very accurate, we want to make sure 100% of kids who need and deserve an IEP get one. And we also want to make sure 100% of the kids who shouldn't have an IEP don't get one. And we thought this was an area that a slightly different process might be able to fine tune that. Fourth area has a number of components. And as the superintendent mentioned, our work was a joint effort with the association. Your special educators are stressed. It is a hard job everywhere. Seems to be particularly hard here. And there were 4 recommendations we had for how to make their work much more sustainable and to do it in a completely cost-neutral way, which I think surprised some of the special educators. I want to say from the outset, a lot of folks assumed that the reason they were so stressed was there just weren't enough of them. And if that was what the data said, that's what I'd come here and tell you. But what we found was it was more systems and practices that stressed them out. And if you added 25% more staff tomorrow, they might celebrate for an hour, but I'm telling you a year from now, they will be equally stressed. You can't just staff your way out of their stress. 4 things you could do. One is to allow special educators to play to their strengths. We met some special educators that I'm really strong at teaching math, not so in teaching English, but I'm co-teaching both. Where I am really strong working with kids with behavior challenges, but I'm teaching math. Special educators are asked to do more different things than any other role in the school system. And folks have just shared, I'm good at some of them and not nearly as good as others, and it is stressful when half my day is not playing to my strength. We also heard, and we looked at their time studies, your special educators are going to a boatload of meetings. They spend an enormous amount of time in meetings, both special ed and not special ed meetings. And as they said, if I'm there for a reason, then I feel good. And they also said, I spend 6-7 hours in some meetings in which I don't speak. And I knew going in I wasn't going to speak. And I think in a sense of trying to make sure everybody's included and everybody who could contribute had a chance to contribute, pendulum swung too far. And mind you, if you go to a meeting and first of all, means I got work that's going to get done after that meeting, going to be done nights or weekends. And at the same time, if I was there and didn't actually have anything to say or anything to contribute, and now I'm working nights and weekends, that's very stressful. We also thought that creating a mechanism to surface and address workload and work-life issues on a more regular basis, if I am a special educator and I'm stressed, they are going to the union. And they're, quote, there to help. But as they've shared with us and their own members, most of these things that are causing stress are not contractual. The association just isn't actually the logical place to be able to address some of their issues. And then lastly, and I think this is obviously a very big one, so I don't want to move to it too quickly, is the way most school systems and particularly in Ohio determine, hey, what is the work you're asking me as an individual special educator to do? Is they say, hey, we're going to assign you a caseload. That is a list of students. And to large part, the list is going to be, hey, here's 16 kids or here's 18 kids. It is a number of kids. And we're balancing it out because everybody's going to get the same number. As they will tell you, my 16 and your 16 have entirely different needs. And as most of them will tell you, and I'm pretty darn sure mine 16 have a lot more needs than yours. Interestingly enough, they can't know that. There is no hard data, but the feeling is that some have much bigger workloads than others. And if you don't know for sure, I think 80% probably assume they're above average, when I know for in fact, mathematically, only half can be above average. The other thing about it is, it's really how many hours is it going to take to serve these students? And if it takes 20 hours to serve my kids and 15 hours to serve yours, you got an easier workload than I do. Doesn't matter how many kids are on that list. And so there has been a hope to, and certainly our recommendation, to think about balancing the workload, not just the number of kids on their list, but how many hours will take to serve them. But to do that, and this is something that I don't think the staff had thought through, is you can't do that calculation. You can't balance things out if you don't also think about what's called group size. And so this is so important, I'm going to take a minute on this. So imagine you've got a list of 16 and I got a list of 16 and we added up all the hours and it came to 50 hours of services. If I choose to work with all those kids one-on-one, it'll take me 50 hours to serve all those kids. And if on average I had 2 kids in a group, it'd take me 25 hours to serve those kids. And yes, if I had groups of 3, it would take me 17 hours. We saw an incredible range of how teachers choose to form groups, are able to form groups. So some of your most stressed people might only have 17 hours worth of kids to serve, but it's taking them 25 or 30 hours to do it because of decisions they've made about group size. And so there's this very significant relationship to how many hours it's going to take me to do something and what's the targeted group size. Our recommendation is to think through collectively and inclusively what are the right target group sizes, and it's not a number. It's different for speech and language than OT, it's different at elementary than high school, but to think through those group sizes so that you can, in fact, reasonably calculate how many hours it should take to serve a group of kids, and then you can balance the workload. We believe if you do that, 2 good things happen. The stress on each teacher reduces, people have manageable and equitable workloads, and equally as importantly, there's transparency. Because I think absent transparency, we all assume we got the short end of the stick. Last thought is, as you think about addressing the growing challenge of problematic behavior, every school system's experiencing this. You're no different, people say. And this is just to recognize that behavior and mental health needs of kids are growing. They're a bit of a specialty. Behavior and mental health are different topics, different kinds of specialties. Often this falls to special education, but many of the kids with these needs are not kids with disabilities. And so just as mental health and behavior becomes a bigger part of what you have to do, thinking about how do you organize from a management and leadership perspective, reflecting both its importance and its specialization. That is a relatively quick walk through almost a year's worth of work. Love to get your thoughts, questions, and reactions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levinson. Would anyone like to go first? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much for a very approachable presentation. I know you're used to that, but I appreciate it.
Send the praise this way. Appreciate it.
Well, I just have a handful of questions.
Sure.
This is very, very helpful for all of us. We've been hearing about it and have seen bits and pieces, and I've got a sneak peek into kind of what we're thinking about doing. So kind of the research behind it is great. So thank you. Basic question. You said one of your goals was to do all of this within budget, which is fantastic. But are there times when you look at it? My question gets at, like, if you came in and you looked at the situation and said, we need to make a lot of changes, maybe we can't do it within budget, is that something that you're comfortable doing?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No, if you need to spend more, you should spend more.
Right.
It happens, and here's why you can do this without, quote, spending more. Two reasons. First is the issue of the stress on the teachers. You're not understaffed. The stress is coming. If you've got twice as many teachers, if I hate teaching math and I'm teaching math for 2 hours a day,
Absolutely.
my day still stinks.
Right.
So you can't buy your way out of that. And second, because the current strategy is of a lot of moving 2 teachers into a classroom, and because you've felt as a district, hey, we need 2 teachers in math and English and science and social studies. Less than 5% of our clients have 2 teachers in science and social studies. You do. You already hired a whole lot of people. So you've already made the investment. Okay. That's why it doesn't cost more money.
Thank you. So you also mentioned that you gave kind of, you try not to make too many recommendations, right? Because if you throw everything in the kitchen sink at it, nothing's going to happen, which is true. But how did you evaluate which of your recommendations kind of rose to the top?
Sure. We thought about a few things. The first, we asked ourselves, what's going to have the biggest impact on kids? How can I get the most kids, the most gain? Second thing we ask, Where can we build off of strengths? There is, I think it was Madeleine Albright said, the doability measure. Which of these things, like if you're already doing some of it, we just know it is so much easier to do more of it. So you have living examples and at every level of services and supports that were aligned to these best practices for kids without disabilities. So that gives a kind of a nod in that direction. And then I think the third is where were we really hearing from your staff? Where are they feeling the pressure? So try to kind of balance the best practices, our opinion, and their opinion. And I think it, as we shared the list of, when we met, should have mentioned, we created something called the Guiding Coalition, which is a group of teachers and administrators, both school-based and central office, to be our sounding board. And when the second meeting we had with them, and we showed them these recommendations, the two questions we ask. The first is, A, does this sound like your school system? And second, are these the right ones? And again, I've done this a lot of times, and sometimes the answer is no. We don't, where's this and where's that, and why'd you come up with that? The feedback from the Guiding Coalition was really incredibly supportive. It's like, yes, we should do this. This is the stuff that will make a difference. So I felt more comfortable leaving that meeting than many others because this is a big change. And it's not uncommon to leave a meeting like that with people saying, I need to think about it more. What they wanted to think about was how to move forward.
Awesome. My next question, job embedded coaching. I'm just curious if you in the overall report, you don't need to give details, included like what that looks like and how we implement that.
We have, but also with all of these things, I want to be fair. You said we're approachable. The 300-page report is not very approachable. So we did not write a 300-page report. So we've definitely said, for example, you need to embrace job embedded coaching. We've given an overview of that. A logical next step is you need the 30-page report, the 30-page plan with your coaches, with your principals, with teachers to work out the next level of detail.
Sure.
Every good idea can be implemented poorly. Never underestimate that. So all of these next require another level of planning the details. I think our goal was to help you set the direction.
Okay.
And give you enough of the details to decide whether you wanted to do it.
Okay.
It's not enough to actually do it yet.
So there's more work, in other words.
There is more work, unfortunately.
I just had a quick question about, there's a slide, you were talking about students with IEPs and pull-out support and co-teaching and replacement classes, and that all makes great sense to me. I was just wondering, you may have said this and I just missed it. Would you eliminate co-teaching at the secondary level, or what is that? What
So I think what you have to do, so the research on co-teaching says sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. It is great when you have a pair that click, connect, have expertise, have chemistry, and it's not great when you don't have those things. Also, you can't take anything away until you have something better or different. And ultimately, the IEP team decides what the services are, not the district. What we have seen is, the saying is, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. You have co-teaching, and you have replacement classes. Those are the two things you have. And so when an IEP team sits down, they choose one of the two, 99% of the cases. We have found in other districts when this extra time intervention from a content-strong teacher is on the table, more and more and more IEP teams and parents and kids will say, that's what we should be doing. Ultimately, I think you're going to have three things on the table, not two. And the system and the IEP process will figure out how much of each. I think you will find, and we certainly met, many of your special educators don't feel like they're contributing as a co-teacher.
Okay.
Others do. And I think you need to find where it's working and keep it and match the kids who benefit from it. And don't keep it where it's not working and have other options for kids.
Okay. And based on your last answers, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. and this is my last question. You talked a lot about making sure the kids that needed IEPs had them, and making sure the kids didn't need them, and specifically around the pre-K level.
Yep.
So are there high-level recommendations around how to better evaluate at the pre-K level, or kind of the go-forward strategy there?
Yeah, I mean, so often what we've seen, and this is a very common issue, sometimes you can be too close to it. So what we've had, and again, same from whether it's pre-K or even when kids are moving from middle school to high school, there's this, the basic rule of life is the next grade level is scary as can be. And a presumption that if it's scary, adding some services can only help. But the people on the receiving end, they're not so scared. High school people don't think high school is scary. Middle school people are quite certain it is. So essentially what we've seen as a way to overcome that sense of other, we don't kind of know what's up there, is we often would recommend having a specialized evaluation team that is 2/3 the folks on the receiving side and 1/3 the folks on the sending side. So both sides are there, but the people who, more than half the room, are not scared about what comes next.
Yep.
And that model alone really tends to lead to much better decisions.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Stephanie. Jennifer, you want to go
I'll
next?
go ahead and go. Thank you. This was really great to hear about the research and everything you had done. I know some of us got interviewed. I did. It was a good discussion. I appreciated it. Did you say parents and students were interviewed also?
I know we interviewed some parents. I've got to admit, I don't remember the whole list. I know it was more than 100 folks. And I can definitely go back to check the who.
Okay, thank you. Then my other question on, the things that all the students need, the core instruction and the extra time. I get it that is what is needed, but where does that extra time come from? If they're not getting pulled out and the teacher has a full level.
Yep. So 3 different places, 3 common places, and you will notice that the last book we wrote was on scheduling, because it turned out to implement all these things, you have to get good at scheduling. So first of all, many elementary schools already have what's called intervention and enrichment blocks or WIN blocks. It's your RTI, your MTSS time. So you're already doing it at the elementary level for many kids who don't have a disability. It is more a mindset than a schedule that said, when should we help the kids with disabilities? Second is even a number of kids at the middle school and high school, they're going into a resource room for more IEP goal kind of stuff. So they've already found time there. So weirdly enough, there is some time already there. The second is, certainly at a high school, kids take different courses. Every student has a different schedule. What we've seen, for example, when the decision we made when we were implementing this in my district, we looked at the schedules of most 12th graders, most seniors who struggled. They weren't taking 4 years of foreign language. So we said, as a 9th grader, take 2 periods of math and don't take a foreign language, take that next year. We looked at the courses kids were not taking as a senior and said, don't take them as a freshman. When middle schools gets a little tougher, something's got to give. And different districts will definitely make different decisions. For my kids and for the district I ran, we actually said, if a student made it to middle school and really struggles to read, maybe not taking a foreign language is a trade-off worth making. That's a decision that districts and schools and families make. But I don't want to suggest that nothing gives. But I definitely want to suggest that these will be the most impactful courses and supports in the life of a student. And the earlier you intervene, the earlier you catch up, they shouldn't have to be getting this extra time for 12 years.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Great.
That's it for me for now.
Thanks, Jennifer. Almost called you Stephanie. Sorry, Amber, would you like to go next? Stephanie,
Sure.
you've already gone.
Jennifer actually touched on most of my questions. I too was curious about the student involvement. You talked a lot about the teachers, which I think is a critical component of this, obviously, but I would be interested in, knowing the feedback from the students and the parents, I would be very curious about how the parents who are embedded in this process and are living this process and are deeply influenced and affected by this process feel about some of the changes you're proposing.
Yeah, and again, I've worked with a lot. I don't want to give you quotes from folks that I'm not 100% sure happened here. I will say that in most districts we work with, parents, 90% of the parents are 110% on board. Like they have been wondering, how come my kid isn't getting the extra time? How come there are these interventions that seem awfully good and my kid got pulled out of them? Again, I don't want to speak for all parents, and I'll definitely go back to my notes and share with the superintendent what we heard. But across the country, as these trends have become much more common, parents have, in many ways, parents of students with disabilities have been leading the charge for, because I think in the two things that we hear from a lot of parents across the country is the achievement gap is not shrinking. I think they're acutely aware that hardworking, smart people are trying very, very hard to help their kids. But the vast majority of them are not reading on grade level. They are struggling academically, and 8 or 10 years of special ed isn't changing that. And the other thing we hear, definitely once their kids hit 2025, is, whoa, we fought for all these services right through high school and we didn't, and then the fall off. I mean, one of the saddest figures is 80% of kids with disabilities drop out of college their first semester. So this meant they wanted to go to college, had the ability to get into college, showed up at college, often went to a college that offered and proclaimed all these services to help kids with disabilities. But you got to go walk to another building and make an appointment and get those services. They don't come to you. And I think there's a growing recognition that independence is a core skill, because the world is just not nearly as nice and supportive as public schools are once you graduate. So,
Slide number 13, the graphic you had that ended with mastery. Did you, when you were doing your classroom visits, it looks like something I would see at Phoenix Middle School. Like that's sort of their, they very much believe in the extra time to learn and the additional attention. Did you spend any time in that building at all, or Linworth?
Yeah, we had a team that went out
Worthington
to
Academy?
So again, as I shared, all these best practices we're talking about are currently happening somewhere in this district. There's nothing here that some kids aren't already getting, which is great. And your MTSS program is very much aligned to this. What we did see, that it doesn't happen in every school. It happens more at the elementary than the middle and high schools. But most importantly, that if I struggled to read or struggled in math and did not have a disability, I'm much more likely to get access to those services. And once I have an IEP, I'm much less likely. But I want to be clear, this is again why we're very optimistic that there's nothing here. Maybe it's why the Guiding Coalition rallied around it fairly quickly. There is a sense of familiarity to these practices. This is not brand new to you all. It's just not as widely spread as it should be.
It was encouraging to hear when you started off the presentation, the great things that we are doing here.
You're
and
doing
how,
many.
Compared to all the schools that you've seen across the country, and I think that's a great testament to Worthington and the staff and educators who work here.
Absolutely.
I do worry about, you were talking about the mental health of the teachers, and it's not a problem unique to Worthington that special education teachers are stressed and burnout, and retention is difficult. You touched on a little bit about that, but is there any, I know you didn't want to throw out a lot of recommendations, but I mean, how critical is the situation, I guess?
So special educators across the country are in the most short supply. All 50 states have a shortage. 49 states had a shortage before the pandemic. It's gotten worse. we are seeing from the long-term perspective, the number of folks who are saying, I want to be a special educator and enrolling in special education programs nationwide is down by 50% in the last 20 years. So this problem is getting worse, not better. People are leaving much faster than they're entering. On their way out, they're saying it's an impossible job. And so I think this idea of what we call job redesign, and the elements of the job redesign is ask me what I'm good at, let me do what I'm good at. Second, give me an amount of work that is doable and that I actually know and believe is doable, because I think those are different things. We are fairly confident, we've run calculations. 99% of your teachers think their workload, caseload will decline. And I've said this to the staff, if we do this balancing, not everybody's getting less. Some people are going to get more. But the folks who are getting more will actually know why. We'll be able to see and calculate that it is fair and that it was doable. And if they are, if they're in a school that makes me go to 12 extra hours of meetings that I don't need to be at, the solution shouldn't be, hey, let's get more staff so you can go to those meetings. The solution needs to be, hey, there's no reason for you to be in so many meetings. I'm not blaming them because they're invited in a way that they usually cannot say no to. But the solution is to say, hey, you're a very talented person. First, we're going to let you play to your strength. And second, we're going to let you do about 2/3 of your day of working with kids. And if the system and structure isn't allowing you to do that, there should be a mechanism to voice and air that so somebody can say, hey, why they're going to so many meetings. And again, what's really interesting, I've interviewed maybe 10,000 special educators in my life. Two kinds of people are most stressed. Those who have incredibly small group sizes by choice. Because there aren't enough hours. And the second is the people who have really good thoughts and ideas and everybody wants them at the meeting, just in case. And you are a thoughtful, collaborative person, you can end up with 8 or 10 extra hours of meetings. That's really stressful because you don't know how to say no, but you still got the same number of kids to see. So I think our experience has been that these kind of steps we've talked about have really, special educators really like them. I mean, you got to do them well, you got to do them thoughtfully, but it really does change. Just one last story, I was doing a webinar, 600 people, and the worst thing in the world is doing a webinar because you can't see the audience, you have no idea whether anyone's even listening. As a presenter, it's the worst thing I do. And I was doing one on improving teacher work life. And I got to the playing to their strengths section. And, as we're presenting, I don't really look at the chat, but all of a sudden, it starts beeping boom, 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 and I'm seeing this whole line. I said, I must have said something really offensive because the place is going crazy. So I said, pause. I said, give me 30 seconds. I think I got 120 messages. Let me look at a few of them. And here was the messages. Can you name a district that's doing this? I will send my resume today. Can we really do this? This would be the greatest thing in the world. Tell me more about this. It was basically the most upbeat feedback I've ever gotten on an in-person webinar in my life. We've got entire states looking to move in this direction. Somehow, we got to the place where we assumed every special educator could do everything. It was never true, but it just seems maybe the list keeps getting bigger and getting more stressful. And maybe as a district, the fact that you do, co-teaching in 4 subjects, that's just more. The fact that everybody's dealing with more behaviors, that's more on their list. So I think we took a hard situation, made it harder, but I think it can be undone, and I think it really will make a world of difference for the staff.
And is there concern at all, and have you seen it in some of the other schools you've had? We're talking about how more time is needed, the general education teachers need to be more of the leaders in this area and sort of spearheading things. Is there sort of burnout that then happens on the other side when you're shifting things around?
The answer is yes if you do it poorly. Like, you can't just say, hey, teacher who told Nate when he was interviewing you, you don't feel confident and capable of serving all these kids with disabilities in your room alone. If you came in and said, no, you're wrong, and I'm so certain you're wrong, we're going to yank out your co-teacher tomorrow. Yeah, they're going to be stressed and it's going to blow up. You have to build the capacity. Now, I do think you will have some teachers that'll get there very quickly and others taking longer, but yeah, you need to provide the supports. And it is a gradual release. Now, that said, once they've gotten over that hump, and let's be clear, most teachers in most school systems are already doing this. Your level of 2 teachers in a room is much higher than other places. So again, this is not a theory, but managing the transition and having people feel supported through that transition is really important. You cannot pull the rug out on people.
Thank you. Thank you. For
I don't think
answering.
you would, but I just have to say that
Yeah.
because a few places we work
I have
did.
every confidence in the administration here that they could implement this well. Thank you for your
Sure.
time and thank you for answering my questions.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amber. Kelly?
Okay. That was a lot. And I'm just, I mean, I have lots of notes. I don't have a lot of questions. My colleagues asked wonderful questions. I'm sure Nikki has a lot of questions. There are just a couple of points that I appreciated that you pointed out. And I appreciate that this work doesn't end with this presentation, that it's not like, and then we flip a switch, that there's still work to do. There's still a transition.
Yep.
There's still building capacity, and figuring out what works best here and what works best for our students. So I do have a question about the teachers that you engaged with, and you talked about their stress, and a lot of it came with their caseloads and things like that. Did they share feedback and how that is trickling down to the students and their progress?
I mean, certainly in those conversations, the staff is trying to do the best for their kids, without a doubt. I think they feel they are doing the best for their kids. I think when they're here, they're doing their best, and at some point it's going to be too much, and they're not going to be here. So I don't think from their perspective, it is impacting the students. I will say, though, and this is where I do think it impacts students, if I am tasked with helping a student who has math goals, they're struggling in math, and I'm not strong at teaching math, there's just a limit to how much help I can provide. And so I think from the student perspective, the playing to strengths is as beneficial for them as it is for the staff. And I think that's where you get into the impact on the kids.
That's my second point that I'm glad you pulled out, is that to cultivate leaning into their strengths to be the best support for that student that's in front of them at the time, so that they're not burned out, and so that student is getting their best. They're all the best teachers, right? But like getting the best of that specific teacher.
Yep.
So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the differentiation that not all special education teachers are the same. My mom is a nurse, and I used to ask her questions, and she would say, Kelly, I do with surgery. Like, I don't do this area of nursing. Yes, I'm a nurse, but this is my specialty, and this is where I can offer my expertise to you. So I think that's the same with special education. And so I appreciate that call out and that concentration. The other thing, so many notes, I'm sorry, they're all kind of over the place. Bear with me. No, I can't find it right now. I just know that we'll be working with, or the administration will be working. I appreciate this time, and I'm sure I'll have questions.
Sure. Anytime.
As the process goes on, and I'm sure our administration will keep us updated. So I appreciate the time. I hope that this lands well with teachers and administrators and families, and that yeah, we can, that build the capacity part of it is really good. Thank you for
You're
your time.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Nate. I have just a few more questions. Thank you for all the
I could go all
information
night.
you've shared
I
thus
love
far.
this stuff, so yeah,
Not
haven't
sure
worn me
everyone else
out.
here has that same stamina, but I appreciate your willingness to do so. The one comment related to the fact that the it can't hurt mentality around IEPs. Of all the things that you've suggested, I can imagine that being one that a parent group would be a little hesitant about, because if you think about sometimes parents feel like they have to advocate a lot in this space because they have to learn, the ins and outs of IEPs and 504s, and those are just things that
Yep.
the everyday person doesn't know. So how do we navigate that space, or what advice do you have for us in navigating that space to maintain the trust and confidence of our parents, and that, we're still putting forth IEPs when they're necessary, and holding off when we feel like perhaps more data is needed, or more assistance is needed, hands-on assistance, and whatever it may
Sure.
be.
Yeah, so here's how I think you can navigate that so parents can be very comfortable, and we want them to be very comfortable. So imagine you got a student, you got a child, and they're struggling. And they're a little kid, and they're struggling. That's stressful. And if the system was saying, hey, don't worry. Well, don't tell me not to worry, it's my kid. I'm obviously worried. And they said, we're going to give it time. I don't like that answer either. But what if you said, and we have a really strong, this guy flew in all the way from Boston to tell us how excellent our MTSS system is. And here's what we're going to do for your son or daughter or child. We're going to have this reading intervention, and we've identified what their areas of need are, and it's phonics, and it's orphonemic awareness, and these are the 6 signs. This is all what your MTSS system does. And your MTS system even says, and if Nate has this struggle, here is what we're going to do for them. What parents want, in my experience, isn't an IEP. They want help, and they want their kid to catch up. In a world without MTSS, you are basically saying, hey, let's wait and see if they outgrow it, see if good things happen. I wouldn't wait if it was my child. With a strong MTSS system, you're not asking them to wait. You're actually telling them, here's what we're going to do. And then what's really interesting, this happened in my district, where we built such a strong, say, reading intervention program through MTSS, that if you got an IEP for reading, what we did is we put you into the MTSS reading program. And a parent said, well, then why would I want an IEP? I'm going to get the exact same thing. And I said, exactly. And I said, oh, so we can skip all those meetings? And so as your MTS system strengthens and develops and people come to understand it, you have a thing in place that will automatically start helping. And I think that really does, they need to see help. And you've built that. And you need to help educate folks that you didn't need an IEP to get the help.
Yeah, I really appreciate that explanation. I mean, you obviously touched on the MTSS before, and the strength of the MTS system, especially as it relates to reading, but I didn't connect the fact that that was such a key component to providing those services when when students are struggling. Obviously it is, but in lieu of, potentially in lieu of the IEP.
Yep.
You mentioned the 2 to 3 to 1 to 3 ratio, 2/3 to 1/3 ratio. Are we a 1-to-1 ratio right now in evaluating the giving and receiving of services?
As far as, so what I was saying is, like, when you have that team that's decided to write the IEP, what is typical in most school systems is the sending school writes the IEP, or the sending level writes the IEP. So, or I know you have some kind of a joint team.
We do, yeah.
But at least from our interviews, the sending school holds the pen.
Gotcha.
And the receiving school advises and gives consent. And I would say in the reality of the power dynamic is that the sending school has most of the say. Because we've even spoken to some folks on the receiving end who said, yeah, we said we don't think we should do this. And so I think it is not just about the head count is one issue. It's a way of making my point, but I think it's the who is really holding the pen, if you will.
Okay. And it needs to be held by those who are actually going to be providing those services. So in other words, the receiving side. Okay.
And they just have a better sense of what's there and what's going to be available and what the MTS system looks like. And
that's helpful.
And they can also make, there's the other issue, just for, again, getting back to the parents. If a sending school says, don't worry, there'll be MTSS. So how do you know? You're not there. If the receiving school said, at this school, this is what we do, and like on the second day, based on the data we already have, they'll be in an MTS reading intervention. So, okay, great. Glad to hear it. So just the whole dynamic changes.
I can see
because
that.
You can't make a promise about a school you don't teach in.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, how that message would land very differently based upon who it's coming from. Okay, thank you. I have two more questions. And I promise that's it, unless afterwards others have additional questions. But you touched on creating a mechanism to surface and address workload and work-life issues on a more regular basis. I would love to know how other districts have accomplished that. What does that look like?
Sure. So the two-step process. Step one is to actually have a fair and equitable and transparent system. So that you can't say, hey, we're going to address imbalances or inequities or stresses in a system that essentially says, hey, your rules say 24 kids on a list. And so I think once you have a more thoughtful system, then, because in theory, you should be able to balance the workload. So if I'm a teacher and it's out of balance, I need a place to go. And I think there are two ways of doing this. Because going to the association, it's not a contractual thing. So it's just, they can't really solve it. And I think the weird part about a special education teacher, like if a classroom teacher, an art teacher feels something's wrong, they go to their principal. Our experience is if special educator goes to principal says, I'd like to help, but I don't actually run special ed. They have less span of control over these kids. They don't make the caseload. And I think if you go in a district this size, if they go to the director, that's a lot of staff in this building. And that's not a practical way of working it out either. So the two things that tends to happen is one, I'm a fan of advisory councils. So this is for superintendent, Kim, to meet with a representative group of teachers on a regular basis, which lets you track whether the system as a whole is working. And are there trends? Did something change? Oh, we rolled out this new program or this new tweak to MTS, and all of a sudden it's spiking what's happening for special educators. You want to learn about that fast. And so these advisory councils help you keep a pulse. And then I think the second is whether it's an HR function or a different function where a teacher could say, hey, I know we've got these rules. I don't think they've been appropriately applied. You just need in part of your organizational structure to have somebody say, okay, let me look into it. And because you have a transparent system, they can say, hey, are we living up to this plan we set? And it tends to have to be central office because they've got to be able to talk to principals, talk to the special ed folks, talk to the general ed folks, and figure out, are we living up to the plan we put in place? And then you find, so often it happened to me in one place where I had two people left for maternity, and we didn't quite fully backfill, and it all landed on one person, and they were totally stressing out. He said, yeah, I guess that's really not the way we were supposed to handle it. And then you got to intervene and pull some help from another school or bring in a part-time person from an agency because something happened. Maternity would be a classic case of a good system just fell apart.
Excellent. That's helpful.
Great.
Thank you. My last question is on number 5, enhanced services and supports for students with challenging behaviors and mental health needs. And specifically, I don't know. I think this is one of those situations where as humans, sometimes we hear what we want to hear. What I was hearing through this particular slide is that mental health needs to be more woven into teaching across the board, meaning our teachers being skilled in that area to address mental
To
health.
a degree. So what we talk about in the report, because I moved fairly quickly in tonight's presentation, is mental health and behavior is four challenges, not one. And having specialization and 4 strategies. So a classroom teacher will never be a mental health expert. And we want them to be great at teaching reading and math to kids with mild to moderate disabilities and learn the science of reading. So general education classroom teachers got to have a base level of understanding and rules and procedures and norms in their classroom to address very baseline needs. As the needs of kids increase, if it is mental health needs, you're going to need folks who are very strong in mental health. But if it's behavior needs, which is actually different, you're going to need somebody very strong in behavior. And so where these systems fall apart, and why I think American schools are so stressed, is 2 things are happening. One, we're asking classroom teachers to do the tier 1, the tier 2, and the tier 3 kind of behavior support and mental health support. They're really important and appropriate for one of those levels, but not all of them. And we have conflated behavior and mental health. And so you think about a school psychologist, again, get them in a room and say, everybody who loves doing mental health, go over there. And everybody who likes doing behavior, go over there. And if you're really happy doing both, stay in the middle. We have very few people when we do that. We literally do that and watch them disperse. Maybe 20% of them stay in the middle and want to do both. Most of these folks are much stronger one way or the other, but they're often tasked with doing both. And then obviously I'm a special educator and I may not be good at either. If the kid has an IEP, I might also be tasked with it. So it really is about both letting folks specialize and recognizing that you have different levels of need. And classroom teachers are very appropriate for one level, but definitely going to be not able, and we shouldn't expect them to, deal with the very, very significant behaviors or very significant mental health needs.
Excellent, thank you.
Great.
That was very helpful.
Great.
Any follow-up questions from my colleagues? Then on behalf of the entire board and the administration, thank you for the excellent presentation, the thorough response to questions, and the tremendous amount of work that has gone into this report.
Our pleasure. Very excited to be here, very excited to do the work. And again, I will just close with your leadership and your teachers, the Guiding Coalition, your superintendent.
I was going to say, before you
Yeah.
walk away,
Yeah,
Dr.
sure.
Bowers may want to say a few things.
Okay.
Well, I don't need to say them to Nate, but we do appreciate you being here and your work. So I did want to say publicly that I've been incredibly proud of our special ed team, right? So Kim Marani, Beth Raina Williams, Renee Brenson are all here tonight. They really opened their doors and said, we want to look at what we're doing. We want this outside view, and we're going to give you all the information that you want. That takes a lot of courage. So I really appreciate their work, their reflection, their willingness to say, hey, we want to serve kids as best we can in Worthington. I want the board to know that what you heard tonight is a ton of work, right? And we think it will be a multi-year transition, multi being somewhere around 5 years for us to make this full transition. We have contracted with New Solutions to help us for the next year to 18 months in making this transition. We want to do it right. We're committed to making these shifts in a way that's good for kids and good for staff in Worthington. And we recognize that as we really dig into this, we're going to need some help. So they're going to continue to work with us. So you're going to continue to see the New Solutions team guide us through these processes, because some of them for me, like, they're hard to wrap my head around. Like exactly how, like, it's one thing to talk about a workload system. I get my head in the weeds real quick about, I don't know, you know, so we're gonna lean on their expertise to make that change. The other thing going on right now is our AAPL team is out presenting this information to all of our teaching staff. all of our school staff. They've committed, they're doing a great job. They want to see everybody face to face. So that's a long process in a place like Worthington that only does a couple staff meetings a week. And so they're on a staff meeting tour and going through the process, talking about these findings, and then what's our timeline for implementation, what can staff expect. And so some of our staff have heard that. Obviously, this is a public meeting. Hopefully people tune in to watch this presentation. But then many of our staff will still hear that over the next few weeks as they dig into that presentation. So, Nate, thank you.
You're
Yeah,
very
Nate,
welcome.
thank you. Glad to
Thank
hear you're
you.
going to be around for a while.
So am I. Thanks.
All right, that brings
as the five of us, that when we come back, we're sharing what we're learning and obviously giving input, whatnot. And also keeping the board president and the superintendent informed of what conferences, and the treasurer, obviously, it's important for him to know because he registers us, to know that information. So that's the biggest change in that policy.
Thanks. And you know, as Kelly and I talked about it, I support it. I mean, the last thing I want, we've already set this budget aside. We never go beyond the budget. No one's out there, you know, flying to another state to attend a conference without us all being on the same page. But at the same time, and our current policy as it stands can be a barrier depending upon our schedule to getting registered and actually being able to attend local conferences. So
Right.
I trust go ahead.
Just like we had the really large gap before our April 8th meeting. If there was something that came up during that time, you'd have to miss it or pay a higher registration fee because we didn't have a meeting to vote on that. So.
Yeah, so I personally trust our degree of professionalism that we'll be able to navigate the space without that requirement in the policy.
Okay. That was the only change.
Thanks, Kelly. Any questions regarding the other policies that were presented?
I have a question about the third grade reading guarantee policy, or a question and a comment. There's a line in green that looks like it's being added, but it's got the little parentheses. It looks like it's one of those things that we have a choice. Are we adding it or not adding it?
Which number are you talking about, Jennifer?
On 2623.02, the third grade reading guarantee, on like the second paragraph, there's a line in green and it's got those parentheses. So are we adding that? I thought we usually put an X, like if we were adding something new.
Well, it doesn't look like it because there is not an X there. I'm looking at Tracy's wonderful key that she sent to us. So that looks like it's additions made by Neola just for their template. So it was an option for us at that time.
And it's not anything we would ever do, so we're not adding that.
Correct.
So-
Correct.
And then the only other thing I wanted to say, it's just a comment, and I kind of went back and forth with Randy a little bit today. I think this policy is confusing, but it's not Neola, it's not our policy, it's the law. Sometimes they use the word will, sometimes they use the word may, and it's confusing, but as long as our staff understands what the rules are. It's the wording we have to use. So.
We did have a little discussion about that, shall, may, those kind of things, and what specifically does that mean? It is confusing.
Yeah, because they go back and forth on a similar sentence and change what they've used, but we are following the law.
Legislation, yes.
And our administrators understand it all, so it's good. So that was all I had.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so this is our first reading. We'll obviously have a second one in our next meeting and then vote on the adoption of the policy. And that brings us to Dr. Bauer's superintendent's report.
Thank you. So the mission of Worthington Schools is to empower a community of learners who will change the world, and we work to do that through our 4 vision statements. So our first vision statements, we will engage each student with diverse opportunities to maximize every student's potential. Guys, we are almost to May, and during the first 2 weeks of May, we will administer over 1,100 AP, so advanced placement exams between our 2 high schools. Our Thomas Worthington students are going to be taking their exams here at the WEC due to construction. So when we have our next board meeting, you'll see the table set up for exams. Worthington Kilbourne will be able to stay at Worthington Kilbourne. In addition, for the first time, we will administer the digital English literature and composition exams at both high school and the digital English language and composition at Worthington Kilbourne High School. So this will be the first of several digital exams as the College Board is moving towards all digital in 5 subjects we offer here in Worthington for 2025. Our second vision statements will provide a safe environment where every student can grow intellectually, emotionally, socially, and physically. So we, Worthington Schools, are the recipient of an Ohio School Safety Grant that covers $30,000 of a $35,000 cost to install license plate reader cameras at the entrances and exits of locations where high school instruction takes place. So that means Thomas Worthington High School, Worthington Kilbourne High School, Linworth, and Worthington Academy. The camera system is in the process of being installed now with the goal of having it operational this summer. So some people have seen those cameras kind of go up around campus. We plan to use the system for a year, but then evaluate the value and financial feasibility of continuing. So it's somewhat of a trial basis for us. The information that's collected on the camera is housed at the manufacturer's system, and only Worthington Schools has access at this point. So the system does have the capability of information sharing with local law enforcement, but that's not been established at this time. So right now it's just our system. The initial goal is to utilize the system in 2 ways. The first is to alert our staff to potential disruptions or safety concerns. So we'll be alerted to vehicles related to plates identified as stolen, or an Amber Alert, or we could enter license plates of people that aren't supposed to be on property. They've been banned from property for some reason. Secondly, the system will store information that can be accessed after an issue. So for an example, if the Marolo building on Thomas's property was vandalized after hours, the current camera may show a vehicle, but the flock system will show what vehicles arrived and departed during specific hours. So you'd have a better piece of that. So we're going to pilot that for the next year. We'll see where that goes, but we want to make sure that you're aware of that. Our third vision statements will provide consistent communication and promote dialogue with our community. So later this week, the Ohio School Public Relations Association Spring Conference will be held here in Columbus in Westerville Polaris Hotel. The winners of the Ohio School Public Relations Association Achievement Awards will be recognized during this conference. So our communication team submitted 5 entries this year, and we were recently notified that they've won at least 2 awards. We don't actually know what those 2 awards are yet. We'll find out at the conference. But winning the awards is a testament to their hard work and commitment to promoting the district positively and effectively communicating with stakeholders. So Vicki, Christy, Don, and Corey will attend the conference to receive these awards on behalf of Worthington School. And we think it's an excellent opportunity for them to be recognized for their hard work. Our fourth vision statements will be responsible and transparent with our community resources. So just a quick construction update. We are on schedule at Thomas Worthington. We're almost under roof in that front classroom wing. Brick is progressing from west to east on the side, and so you can see that. At Worthington Kilbourne, construction has begun to transition in the teacher workspaces. So teacher workspaces are transitioning to the upper area of the gymnasium. So that work is happening at Worthington Kilbourne. We have struggled a little bit to get our permits for the rest of Worthington Kilbourne, so we're hoping to get those through the city of Columbus here shortly, but we're having some permit struggles there. The natatorium is breaking ground, so you can see that happening out front again. And additionally, outside of our high school projects, we are still on schedule to finalize the purchase of what we're calling the Amazon building, but on Bush Boulevard, or on Bush Boulevard, to consolidate all of our operations. So the board authorized that. We're in our due diligence period, but things have progressed well, and we're still on track to officially purchase that building here shortly. So that's my update.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Bowers. I'll first say congratulations to our communications team. Can't wait to hear what the awards are for, and kind of selfishly hope that maybe we can highlight them next time, and that they are videos that include the two of you, because there have been some pretty great communication videos that have gone out. And then I'll open it up to questions for the rest of the board. Questions or comments regarding Dr. Bowers' update? Seeing none, okay. Mr. Cusick, would you like to follow that?
Sure. I can't wait till we rename the Amazon building the Jeff Ebley Shared Services Building. Just two quick items. As you know, hopefully you all know, the state of Ohio is mandating districts adopt new curriculum materials aligned to the science of reading. Our budgeted cost to purchase those materials is roughly $1.4 million. We were notified last week that our share of the $64 million budgeted by the state of Ohio was about $500,000. So that was considerably more than most treasurers thought, because we are an above average wealth district. We didn't think we'd get much. So while that still is an unfunded mandate of about $900,000, that is positive news. The state will also cover the cost of any stipends that we pay our new teachers to provide training. So you'll likely see on future board agendas over the summer next year, $1,200 stipends to some of our staff. The state will fully reimburse us for that. So as critical we are as sometimes to the state of Ohio for its funding expectations, I will give them props on this one. We did get more than we thought. In the news lately has been the State Teachers Retirement System Board, who has been actively advocating for increasing the employer rate from 14 to 18%, so that everyone knows currently the employee and the employer both pay 14%, so they're advocating that we move the employer share from 14 to 18%. That would be almost $4 million annually for us. To be fair, any changes to this rate require legislative approval. No bill has been introduced. Bill was introduced last session and didn't go anywhere, so I don't know the appetite from our legislators to take this up, but it does appear like STRS is seemingly actively marketing and advocating for it, so we should all be aware of that. That is a costly proposal. That is all.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Okay.
I'll just make my one comment that, like, I still call it the Cindy's building. I don't call it the Amazon building. So, been around so long, so that'll be hard to get used to at some point, but I'm looking forward to it.
Love it. That brings us to board committee reports and announcements. Since we started with you, Jennifer, Kelly, do you want to start this time?
I can start.
Okay.
I only have one report. Amber and I had the communications meeting right prior to this meeting, and Vicki and her team reviewed that the quarterly newsletter will be going out early in June, and it will highlight the retirees for this year. TJ will have a section on finance. There will be a facilities update, and it will highlight the class of 2024. As a student in the EBA program, is doing a program, a story on the class of 2024. So that will be lots of pictures and information there will go out. So we had a good discussion about the newsletter and how it's distributed. And then they also went over the facilities report that also will go out soon. I can't remember. Now that's before June though, right? Okay. Which is telling the story of our facility. So I'll let Amber speak on that because it was something that she introduced. So that was really good to hear and kind of get a peek at. And that was really it. Just a good laid back discussion about what's going on in our communications department and how we're trying to reach families and inform our community members of what's going on here in Worthington. That's all I have.
Excellent, thank you. Amber, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'll build upon what Kelly just said a little bit. We've had some conversations just about the transformation our district's going through right now and how to tell that story to the community, because you're not really maybe paying a whole lot of attention. You're driving by, you see the construction, but you don't really know how it fits in with the greater story that is happening here in Worthington, and it's an incredible one. So I think Vicky's team have done a great job of sort of putting some of the highlights into, it's not really newsletter form because it's multiple pages, it's like 8 pages, but story form, I don't know, has some Worthington history and some talks of maybe creating a website based on some of that content, and just the purpose being that, there is a lot of great work happening here in the district and getting that story out to everybody and letting them sort of be part of the journey. So yeah, communications committee was today. A couple other things I had that I've been doing just in the last couple weeks. Nikki and I actually sat in on a call. Phoenix Middle School is going after the AMLE School of Distinction honor. So they requested some parents to provide some feedback to the interviewers. So Nikki and I were a couple of the ones that they had selected, and I think that hopefully we covered everything. It was kind of a fast-paced interview, but I think they'll know in June whether or not they got that. So that's exciting. And then I went to a town hall sort of thing, I guess, that council member Chris Weich had. He was sort of just going through some of the things that's been happening with the city of Columbus lately, and it was a good discussion. It was right around his 100 days of office mark. So, yeah, that's kind of all the updates I had.
Thanks, Amber. I'll just go ahead and go, and then we'll go down if that works. Attended the April PTAC meeting. They will not have a meeting in May, which you anticipated, so I'm glad you attended the one with Stephanie. And I think really the main things to highlight from that meeting, when they had great participation in their scholarship program this year, a lot of students from both sides of the district submitting applications for their scholarship. And then just a shout out of gratitude to Tasha Addy and Dennis Bryant, who have served on the PTAC for a number of years and are stepping down. We're very fortunate in Worthington to have a lot of parents who step up and play really crucial roles in providing additional services to our students and to assist our students, our teachers, and help everything run smoothly. So grateful for the two of them for the service that they've provided. And then I wanted to just highlight that this week is Disability Book Week, and invite just anyone who's listening, and I know I'm sure that we're sharing this throughout our schools, that our school libraries are highlighting it, our Worthington libraries are highlighting it, but really there's an encouragement this week during Disability Book Week to invite people to read books that feature a main character with a disability. I will share just personally, in my own personal book club, we read True Biz within the past year, and it's a book that focuses on the deaf community and deaf culture. And I was shocked and kind of embarrassed about how little I personally knew about the deaf community and the deaf culture. So it's just one that I personally would recommend. It's a fictional work, but even though it's a fictional work, and I'm a huge fan of Adam Grant, I don't know if everyone knows who he is. He's an organizational psychologist, has written a number of well-known books. He just posted the other day that reading fiction isn't just for fun. It has small but meaningful benefits for empathy. And there have been over 70 experiments that show that concern for and understanding of others grow through reading novels, more through reading novels than through watching shows or movies. Immersion in words about imaginary worlds can help us see realities beyond our own. So I just thought that was really powerful and obviously timely. So that's my update.
I apparently had a busy 2 weeks. Yeah, just like, oh my God, I'm talking for a while. So I've been thinking a lot, this is in general, this is kind of going to frame my comments because there was a theme going through a lot of them. I've been thinking a lot about how we as board members can connect with families throughout the community. And I know teachers do it and the district does it, but we often hear the voices that email us, that proactively come to us or proactively come to a meeting, which are incredibly valuable. But I personally feel like I want to hear more voices throughout the community. So I've been thinking about what that looks like and how that happens. That's just, I'm planting a seed. We're not gonna solve that tonight. But anyway, so that's kind of gives you some context to where my brain is around some of the stuff that I did. So our meeting was short, our last meeting was short, so I headed over to the Worthington City Council meeting because they were talking about the pools. So it was a really good conversation. No decisions were made, obviously, but I just thought it would be helpful to update everybody on kind of what they talked about. So they were talking, they are thinking that they want to go with the option that is estimated about 15.4 million in capital improvements that are necessary. Again, not set in stone, but that was the whole conversation was around that investment. Options on the table: levy, city charter millage, which is pulls from that levy, or the joint recreation district, JRD. They discussed putting money from their general fund in. So they were targeting at that point 4 mil, which would bring the total millage that they would need for a levy down. Again, not set in stone, but that was where the conversation was. The JRD has been talked about for quite some time, but at this point, it may be too late to do the JRD, at least in the context of funding a pool, because they're thinking if they need an investment, they need to do a levy in some capacity this November. We don't have time to set up a JRD. So a joint recreation district could be, it just has to be two entities. So it could be the schools and city council, it could be city council and city council of Columbus, but it has to be two efforts. They have to formalize it, they have to have a board. So, there's just a lot of hoops to jump through. From my perspective, a JRD would be incredibly beneficial, but here we are. Mm-hmm.
Quick question, did they talk at all about whether there have been any discussions with the city of Columbus?
They didn't explicitly say, but here's the challenge. They did call out a challenge that partnering with Columbus would bring. Currently, Columbus has a policy, for lack of a better word, that their pools have to be essentially free. So that would be a huge barrier in our current model.
Okay, excellent. I hope someone's reaching out to Chris.
My assumption would be yes, but like that, I don't have any information. They didn't
Sure.
explicitly say
sure.
yes.
Okay,
So, yes
thanks.
or no.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So there was a couple outcomes of the discussion. One being they asked Robin and staff to look into what a levy would look like, right? So what does the language look like? There was a question that came up as to whether or not they can actually do a levy simply because we own the property. So that all of those things have to be investigated and looked at. So we're still really far away, right? But obviously, let's see what else. Let me make sure I didn't miss something. Okay, that was I watched the city council meeting last week as well. There was no more discussion. So that's where we are with everything as far as, what is publicly available. So obviously we've talked about, what that looks like and what that means to us. One of the challenges, I think, and this was brought up in the meeting as well, as they go down this path, it would be likely a Worthington levy, right? And today, it applies to the whole district. And today, every student in our district, in our community, benefits from the same rate that Worthington residents benefit from. And so something that I'm kind of watching is whether or not that changes, because obviously, like, the broader Worthington community is really our community. And so, it's the pool is close to a bus line. The portion of Columbus that our district serves, so the greater Worthington community, is kind of a pool desert. So there's not a lot of opportunity for that. And our pool is well situated, right, by 315, and again, like close to a bus line and things like that. So there's a lot of moving parts there. So that's my update on that. I did go to the AAPL meeting. We learned most of it tonight. So the only other thing I'll mention is we had some amazing updates on all of the summer programs that we have in Worthington. And I do just want to highlight that because we have a lot. We are doing some amazing things. There's opportunities for kids everywhere from intervention summer school all the way through just enrichment and things to kind of keep them going and provide opportunities for them throughout the summer for K through 12. So amazing job. I think Kelly and Amber and I tagged each other out on Chris Weich's 100 days in office. I came late, so they had to leave early. The only thing I want to highlight from that is they talked about transportation. There was a representative from CODA. And so one of the things they talked about was the Link Us initiative, which is something to be aware of and keep an eye on because it's going to be hugely beneficial to everybody in our district, right? Better transportation in Central Ohio. We need it. Anything we can get would be great. And it's beneficial. Additionally, they mentioned that CODA partners with some school districts to provide bus passes to high school students. And they didn't specifically mention Worthington, so I don't know. I haven't had a chance to investigate that further, but I don't know if anybody's aware of that. I think it would be something worth looking into. So, okay. I went to the Wilson Hill Diversity and Art Fair on the 10th, and that was it was a beautiful celebration. And I wanted to highlight one interaction that I saw between two kids because it connected back to something that I saw earlier this year. There were two kids. They had tables with just all kinds of celebration of culture, a lot of food, a lot of samples, right up my alley. One student was showing another student something that she ate at home, and I don't know what the food was, but the other kid tried it, and she said, that's not really for me, but thanks for sharing. And it's important because that is almost verbatim what they teach in the Peace Ambassadors program with WIN. And it was it warmed my little heart to see them kind of just, living that out, right? And then my last thing that I'm going to talk about, I had the opportunity to hear Matt Lofi from the Worthington Chamber speak. And that was, again, Worthington Area Chamber serves the whole school district and then beyond a little bit as well. So they talked about, business development, which is obviously incredibly important to our district as we think about how we extend the levy cycle and we think about how we get additional revenue for our schools. And then during the Q&A session, one of the things that they asked Matt was, what was, when you took this job a couple years ago, what was the most surprising thing that you learned? And he said it was the divide between Worthington and the school district, the Worthington itself and the areas outside of the school district. So I'm bringing this all the way back to what I said at the beginning, where it's just something that we need to be aware of. It's something that I think we've all seen, right? I can't tell you the number of times I've said to somebody, yeah, but only 25 or 30% of our students are in Worthington. And it's just, we need to just keep talking about it and talking about how we are the Worthington area community, right? And we're all, building businesses together and living together and shopping together and doing all of those things and connecting with voices throughout the community. So that's it. I will turn my mic off.
All of that. So I was at the AAPL meeting with Stephanie, so I don't have a whole lot to add, but I really appreciate Angie, Kelly, Rob, Kim, and Emily are all there, and I appreciate that. Well, supposedly hour, but it's an hour and a half or two that we get to spend with you because we learned so much. The summer school program is amazing. We touched, the special ed audit, and we talked a little bit about the portrait of a learner, and Angie shared kind of what they're doing at Wilson Hill and their Den of 10, and they're talking about it. So the schools are bringing that portrait of a learner into the schools, and she was able to show us how we were doing it. So that was great. And then the only other quick thing, I was really fortunate for work to get to go to the screening of the Right to Read documentary with Kareem Weaver from California and an NAACP advocate. And it is just an amazing documentary to show you how powerful the science of reading it is and how helpful it is to the kids. So I hope when it's public that we will all have a chance to watch it and our staff, and it's really good. I don't know when it will really be out there for the public. Because Angie, all you could find was a trailer, right? It's not really out there yet, but Steve Griffith is very into the whole, knowing the whole sequence of the filming and when it'll be ready. So I know he'll keep us updated on it, but really worthwhile when it's out.
I missed just one thing. May 16th is the next chamber luncheon, so everybody, if you want to. That's it.
Thank you. Jennifer, your comment reminded me, and neither one of us brought it up. Jennifer and I attended a presentation, was that last week? On
so.
Vouchers Heard Ohio. And they're really trying to spread the knowledge about how vouchers are damaging to public schools, help people really understand so that it's not something that's not on everyone's radar. And trying to make it more tangible and within given districts, like they were sharing statistics that they had shared to the community within Upper Arlington, and things that they have found really get people's attention to help them understand the damage that vouchers have on public education. So more to come in that space. But I'm sure that if you haven't already, I would take a look at vouchersheardohio.com and subscribe to their update so that you regularly get the latest as to what's transpiring in that space.
Thank you. It was a good
Absolutely.
meeting.
Yeah,
Are
it
you
was.
going to their next one, do you think? I can't go. I forget. She said what the date was.
I'll have to look. I'll circle back to you. And if I do, I'm glad to share out what I
Okay.
learned.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, that brings us to your section, Mr. Cusick.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to recommend that the board approve the minutes from the April 8th meeting as presented in enclosure E1, please.
So moved.
Second.
Assuming there are no questions related to the minutes, seeing none, if you'll call for the vote, please.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes,
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
motion carries.
Yes, I'd like to recommend that the board approve the appropriations modifications as listed in your agenda. These are general fund cross-object appropriation transfers that net to zero, please.
So moved. Second.
No questions or comments? If you'll please call for the vote.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes,
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
thank you, motion carries. Dr. Bowers.
Thank you. I'd like to recommend that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda. That's items F2 through F9 in your agenda. Items F2 through F9, please.
So moved. I'll second. Questions or comments? Seeing none, would you call for the vote, please?
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes,
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. I'd like to recommend that the Board of Education approve item G1. Item G1 is the acceptance of the donations that are listed on the agenda. G1, please.
So moved. Second.
No questions or comments? You'll call for the vote, please.
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes, motion carries.
Thank you. I'd like to recommend that the Board of Education approve item G2. Item G2 is an easement for AEP as we do construction at the Thomas Worthington site. Item G2, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments related to the construction resolution? Great, would you call for the vote, please?
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes,
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
motion carries. I'd like to recommend a motion to approve an addendum to the contract of our treasurer as indicated in enclosure I-1.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments?
No, just to clarify, this was going to be added last year and it was incidentally or accidentally omitted, so.
Yep,
it's
thanks for that
easy.
clarification.
My fault.
It's all good. Would you call for the vote, please?
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Mrs. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes,
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
excellent, motion carries. That brings us to our calendar. We are scheduled for our next meeting for May 13th, where we will have the 5-year forecast. And then we have our goal setting on June 3rd and a regular meeting on June 10th. Any questions or comments regarding our upcoming meetings?
I have a question.
Yes.
So next month, we only have one meeting. And then immediately following, not immediately following, our next meeting is the goals. And Dr. Bowers, what was the timeline you said you will get those around? Not a specific date, but
Yeah,
Should we
I would hope
expect
around
those?
that May 13th time.
Okay.
I mean, sometime that week.
just wanted to look for that. Okay, just so we can prepare for that June meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, as we don't have a need for executive session and have modified the agenda, there being no further business, I will motion to adjourn.
Second.
Would you call for the vote, please?
Mrs. Best,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Epling Skinner.
Yes.
Ms. Harless.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you all for joining us tonight.